Agatha Raisin and the Corpse in the Garden Party. Good evening, and welcome, dear friends. Agatha Raisin adjusted her hat under the warm summer sun, noting the village chatter at the garden party. Then she saw it, a motionless figure beneath the roses. Calm, yet curious, she observed every detail. Who had died so suddenly? And what secrets would the garden's elegance conceal before the day was over? Before Agatha steps into today's mystery, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? It warms our hearts knowing how far Agatha's little adventures travel. Your comments truly keep this cozy corner alive. And if these stories bring you comfort, do subscribe so you never miss a moment. So let's begin.
Chapter 1. A Glittering Gathering. Agatha Raisin stepped out of her little car, the gravel crunching under her sensible shoes, and took a deep breath of the warm summer air. The scent of roses mingled with freshly cut grass, and somewhere close by, the faint aroma of freshly baked scones wafted through the garden. She adjusted her sun hat, a pale shade of yellow that almost matched the sunlight itself, and surveyed the scene before her. The village's annual summer garden party was in full swing. Guests strolled along the winding paths, holding delicate porcelain cups, laughing at jokes she could not hear over the gentle buzz of conversation, and offering polite nods to one another. Everything looked picturesque, almost like a painting come to life. Yet Agatha's sharp eyes noticed the subtle cracks beneath the surface. Near the entrance, Mrs. Pettigrew, always a model of self-importance, was engaged in what appeared to be a spirited argument with Mr. Havisham. Their voices were low, carefully measured, but Agatha caught the tension in Mrs. Pettigrew's tight shoulders and the flicker of annoyance in Mr. Havisham's eyes. A glance in another direction revealed Miss Claiborne, fluttering her lace handkerchief nervously as she leaned too close to Sir Reginald Crumpet, who seemed more interested in adjusting his monocle than in the conversation. Agatha noted it all with quiet amusement. Village rivalries never failed to entertain her, though she suspected that today's minor squabbles might hold more meaning than they let on. The garden itself was a delight. Winding paths bordered with neatly trimmed hedges and flower beds that boasted a riot of colors. Yet something caught Agatha's attention. A small, misplaced ceramic bird perched atop a rose bush, slightly chipped on one wing. It was out of place among the meticulously arranged displays, and her curiosity piqued. Why would someone leave it there? Was it an innocent oversight, or a subtle signal she had yet to understand? She tucked the thought into the back of her mind for later, as she often did when a peculiar detail whispered a story only she seemed capable of hearing. A soft murmur of laughter drifted toward her, and Agatha's eyes found the source. A group of young women near the fountain, whispering among themselves and glancing repeatedly toward the refreshment table. One of them, a newcomer named Clara Jennings, had a slightly forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Agatha noted how her posture shifted whenever someone looked her way, a dance of self-consciousness and vigilance. In another corner, an elderly gentleman meticulously straightened the napkins on a small table, muttering under his breath as if the world might end should a single fold be out of place. As she moved along the path, Agatha allowed herself a small smile. The village had not changed much, and that was precisely why she found comfort here. Yet, as always, the ordinary warmth of the garden and the familiar laughter were punctuated by the odd, inexplicable moments she alone seemed to notice. A sideways glance too sharp, a gesture too hurried, a misplaced bird. These were the things that hinted at stories beneath the polite surface, whispers of hidden grievances, unspoken rivalries, and secrets waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Adjusting her parasol against the bright sun, Agatha took a quiet step back, letting herself observe rather than engage. She sipped from her cup, noting the delicate balance of cordiality and tension, the gentle hum of social maneuvering that made village life endlessly entertaining. For now, all was calm and picturesque, yet Agatha felt the subtle stirring of anticipation, the faint sense that beneath the cheerful chatter, the garden had its own stories to tell, and she, as always, would be ready to see them. Agatha sat at a small wrought-iron table near the center of the garden, her teacup warming her hands. The chatter of the village folk surrounded her in a pleasant hum, punctuated by occasional laughter or the soft clink of porcelain. She had always enjoyed these moments, the gentle rhythm of social life, the way the village revealed itself in gestures and glances if one cared to watch, and Agatha, naturally, cared very much. It was then that she saw it, a cerulean corsage lying on the gravel path, completely out of place among the neat rows of flowers and carefully trimmed hedges. Its color was striking, a soft yet vivid blue that seemed to call attention to itself. Agatha tilted her head, curious. Who would leave such a delicate item here, as if dropped in haste or deliberately placed? No one seemed to notice, and the corsage contrasted sharply against the neutral tones of shoes and gravel around it. She set her cup down and took a cautious step closer, her eyes scanning the crowd to find anyone searching for it. Nearby, Mrs. Craddock was fussing over a tray of pastries, entirely unaware of the misplaced item. Sir Reginald Crumpet adjusted his monocle and offered what he probably thought was a charming bow to Miss Claiborne, who only smiled politely and turned away. The young women near the fountain continued whispering, but Agatha noticed the subtle way Clara Jennings' eyes flicked toward the corsage before she quickly looked elsewhere. It was a minor detail, easily overlooked by most, but Agatha's mind immediately began tracing possible connections. The corsage itself was finely crafted, delicate petals and tiny seed pearls catching the sunlight. The contrast between its elegance and its sudden presence on the gravel suggested urgency, or at the very least, carelessness. Agatha considered who among the guests might have worn it and why it would be abandoned here. She made a mental note to observe those moving with unusual haste or avoiding eye contact. The village might be quaint and familiar, but people were rarely as simple as they seemed, and Agatha's instincts had never misled her. She sipped her tea, letting the warmth calm her thoughts while she examined interactions with a more careful eye. Mr. Havisham was speaking too earnestly to Mrs. Pettigrew, who nodded politely, but with a slightly forced expression. The young women playing a quiet game of croquet seemed tense, their laughter just a fraction too loud, their movements too precise. Even the elderly gentleman, straightening napkins, muttering under his breath, cast an occasional glance toward the area where the corsage lay, as if noticing the disturbance, but choosing to ignore it. Every small detail added a thread to the tapestry of observations Agatha wove silently in her mind. Time passed, marked only by the gentle swirl of a summer breeze and the faint rustle of leaves in the garden. Agatha's attention returned to the corsage. She crouched slightly, careful not to draw notice, and touched it lightly with her fingertip. Its delicate weight confirmed it had been freshly worn, and the tiny pins still held a faint warmth. Whoever had lost it had done so very recently. Her mind traced potential scenarios, each more intriguing than the last. A hurried exit, a subtle confrontation, an unspoken apology, perhaps, left behind in haste. For the moment, the garden hummed with calm. Laughter, chatter, and the occasional clink of cups continued around her, oblivious to the quiet mystery she now held between her fingers. Agatha straightened, placing the corsage on a nearby bench, careful not to disturb its appearance too much, and sipped her tea again. Beneath the cheerful surface of polite conversation and sunlit blooms, a small tension lingered, a whisper of secrets and unsaid truths that only she seemed attuned to, and Agatha, ever observant, would notice everything.
Chapter 2. A Suspicious Bid. The auction had begun, and Agatha found herself standing at the edge of the garden, a cup of lukewarm tea in hand, observing the proceedings with measured interest. Tables had been set up beneath the shade of a large oak, each displaying an assortment of objects, fine china, hand-painted trinkets, and the occasional curious oddity that no one seemed quite certain of. Villagers milled about, murmuring their bids with polite enthusiasm, exchanging polite smiles and casual nods, and yet beneath the surface Agatha could detect the subtle currents of tension that always accompanied such gatherings. Her attention was immediately drawn to one bidder in particular, a stout gentleman with a ruddy complexion and a neatly trimmed moustache, who seemed far too eager for a small, unremarkable vase. The object itself was delicate, perhaps even pretty in a quaint way, but hardly worth the competitive intensity he displayed. He raised his hand rapidly, nodding toward the auctioneer with precise, almost exaggerated gestures, and his eyes darted constantly toward another corner of the garden, where two young women whispered to each other with conspicuous attention. Agatha's curiosity was piqued. Something about the gentleman's behavior seemed out of place among the otherwise relaxed crowd. Most villagers bid calmly, sipping tea between offers or exchanging friendly banter. But he was a study in concentrated purpose, his eyes narrowing each time someone else showed interest in the vase. He noted how he tapped his foot impatiently, leaned slightly forward as if to intimidate potential competitors, and even murmured something under his breath that the nearby breeze carried faintly toward her. At the same time, other subtle interactions began to catch her attention, a nod here, a glance there, a hand brushing briefly against another's as if passing a silent message. Agatha's mind catalogued every detail, the quick whisper between Mrs. Pettigrew and her companion, the fleeting look from the young woman near the fountain toward the seated gentleman, the faint smile exchanged between two older men as they examined the table of ceramics. Each motion seemed innocuous alone, but together they painted a picture of quiet coordination, of secrets shared beneath polite facades. Agatha adjusted her parasol slightly and stepped closer to the edge of the crowd, careful to remain unnoticed. The auctioneer's voice rang clear, calling for higher bids, and the gentleman's intensity increased in proportion. Agatha watched as he leaned forward dramatically, whispering to no one in particular, then glanced once more at the young women. There was a precision to his actions, a deliberate urgency that suggested something more than a simple desire for a decorative object. She took another sip of tea, allowing herself a moment of quiet amusement. Village auctions always held their dramas, but rarely with this level of subtle intrigue. She could almost feel the hidden alliances forming and breaking right before her eyes, small ripples in the otherwise tranquil pond of village life. Agatha's mind traced the possible connections. Why this object? Why now? And catalogued every irregular gesture with the meticulous care she had always admired in herself. As the bidding continued, she noticed the corsage she had seen earlier lying on the gravel near a bench, its cerulean petals catching the sunlight once more. Perhaps it was coincidence, or perhaps it was another thread in the quiet web of tensions she was beginning to unravel. Either way, the presence of these small details only sharpened her attention, encouraging her to watch and wait, to catalogue the interactions and notice the unspoken agreements floating just beneath the cheerful chatter. By the time the vase finally went to the ruddy gentleman with a triumphant flourish, Agatha had a notebook of observations stored neatly in her mind. Every glance, every whisper, every deliberate gesture told a story she was only beginning to decipher. The garden remained sunlit and pleasant, the auction continued with its gentle rhythm, yet beneath the ordinary calm, Agatha sensed the faint stirrings of a much larger puzzle, and she intended to see how it would unfold.
The auction had ended, the last bids accepted, and the crowd beginning to drift toward refreshments, but Agatha remained near the edge of the garden, her gaze sweeping quietly across the guests. She sipped from her teacup, her mind cataloging the unusual behaviors she had observed earlier. The ruddy gentleman, triumphant with his newly acquired vase, was already in whispered conversation with two women standing just beyond the hedgerow, their faces partially hidden by the dappled sunlight. Agatha strained to catch snippets of their words, careful not to appear intrusive, though she suspected that some messages were meant precisely to be overheard. She shouldn't know. Not yet, a hushed female voice murmured, clipped and urgent, almost swallowed by the faint rustle of leaves. The gentleman's low reply was indistinct, but Agatha caught the word cerulean on the breeze. Her eyes narrowed, and her thoughts turned immediately to the abandoned corsage she had noticed earlier. It was subtle, a detail many would dismiss, but Agatha's instincts told her that the repetition of color and context was deliberate, a breadcrumb, perhaps, for someone who knew how to observe carefully. Her curiosity, ever insistent, heightened with the realization that these fragments of conversation could point to hidden motives and alliances. She adjusted her parasol and shifted closer, careful to remain unobtrusive, letting her ears catch more whispers without drawing attention. "If anyone finds out, it could ruin everything," another voice said, the tone almost conspiratorial. A faint chuckle followed, the kind that masked nervousness beneath casual amusement. Agatha's mind began to trace patterns, small, meaningful coincidences that alone might seem trivial, but together suggested careful coordination. The ruddy gentleman seemed central to this quiet network, the one pivot around which others moved with understated purpose. The garden itself, so cheerful under the summer sun, seemed momentarily hushed by the weight of unspoken tension. Agatha's observant eye picked out subtle gestures, a finger brushing a sleeve in warning, a half-turn of a head signaling caution, and uneasy glance toward a guest who was seemingly innocuous. Each tiny motion became a clue, a piece of a puzzle that, when combined with the repeated cerulean motif, hinted at secrets buried just beneath the surface. She allowed herself a small smile, amused by the delicate dance of civility and intrigue. Villagers continued mingling, chatting about trivial matters, complimenting desserts, and admiring floral arrangements. Yet Agatha could see the edges of pretense fraying ever so slightly. The auction had provided the catalyst. The whispers and glances now revealed the hidden currents, the subtle alliances that would shape the story to come. A soft breeze stirred the petals of the roses, and Agatha noticed the faint shimmer of cerulean once more, this time caught in the sunlight on a ribbon tied to a parasol. The repetition was unlikely to be mere coincidence. Her mind traced a tentative connection between the ribbon, the abandoned corsage, and the man who had behaved so aggressively over an otherwise trivial object. The pieces were small and scattered, but each was precisely placed for someone with an attentive eye to notice. By the time she set down her empty teacup, Agatha had a mental map forming, connecting guests to subtle hints of motives, alliances, and potential indiscretions. She noted each character's reactions, each whispered warning, and even the timing of gestures that seemed to signal private agreements. Though nothing was confirmed, the undercurrent of suspicion had solidified in her mind, and she felt the familiar thrill of anticipation that came with observing a mystery beginning to take shape. As she stood there, watching the guests move with deliberate care and subtle tension, Agatha allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. She had not yet uncovered the full story, but the threads were visible, waiting to be woven together, and she, as always, would notice every detail, every nuance, every whispered warning that others thought went unnoticed. Beneath the cheerful laughter and polite conversation, a deeper story was stirring, and Agatha was poised to follow it wherever it led.
Chapter 3. The Garden's Secret. Agatha wandered slowly along the winding garden paths, her eyes tracing the curves of flower beds and the neatly clipped hedges that framed each section. The summer sun cast long, dappled shadows, and the scent of roses mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil. It was the sort of afternoon that invited leisurely exploration, yet Agatha's attention never wavered from the subtleties around her. The garden was alive not just with flowers and laughter, but with the delicate, almost imperceptible signals of human behavior, waiting for a keen observer to notice. Her gaze fell first on a small patch of soil near the edge of a rose bed, slightly disturbed as though something had been recently unearthed or perhaps hastily covered again. Agatha crouched slightly, careful not to draw attention, and studied the faint impressions left in the dirt. There were irregular footprints, delicate yet deliberate, leading toward the ornamental fountain before veering sharply along a path she hadn't noticed earlier. The impressions were subtle, easily missed by anyone not paying close attention, but Agatha catalogued them quietly in her mind. Each disturbance seemed to tell a story. Someone had been here, perhaps in a rush, perhaps in secret, and the garden had held their trace. Moving on, she noticed a tiny trinket partially hidden beneath the leaves of a flowering shrub, a silver locket, faintly scratched, almost as if it had been dropped without care. She picked it up delicately, examining it under the sunlight, turning it over between her fingers. The clasp was slightly bent, suggesting repeated handling, and inside a small photograph that was too faded to discern clearly. It was not hers to investigate fully, of course, but the locket's presence was enough to intrigue her. Why would someone leave such a personal item in the garden? Who might it belong to? Agatha's curiosity was piqued, and her mind began to weave possible scenarios. She continued along the winding path, her gaze alternating between the garden's beauty and the subtle behaviors of the villagers. A group of women clustered near the fountain, their smiles polite yet strained, their eyes flicking to one another as though confirming silent agreements. A young man adjusted his cufflinks nervously while standing apart, glancing repeatedly toward a cluster of older guests. Each gesture, each fleeting interaction added a layer to the puzzle forming in Agatha's mind. It was a dance of ordinary politeness, masking hidden intentions, and she followed it as she would a trail of breadcrumbs. The gentle rustle of leaves brought her attention back to the flora itself. Some of the rose petals were slightly wilted, a minor imperfection among otherwise pristine blooms. Here and there a garden tool lay slightly askew, as if disturbed during some hurried activity. The combination of small disturbances, the footprints, the locket, the subtle signs in the plants created a tapestry of hints that suggested tension and secrecy, details invisible to most but impossible for Agatha to ignore. Pausing beneath an arbor draped in climbing roses, she allowed herself a quiet, approving smile. There was a certain satisfaction in observing the garden in this way, in reading the invisible stories embedded in soil, leaves, and gestures. It reminded her why she had always been drawn to quiet observation, why she found the intricacies of village life endlessly absorbing. Even amidst the cheerful laughter of guests and the bright warmth of the afternoon, there were secrets waiting, small fractures in the surface of civility that promised intrigue for those patient enough to notice. As she straightened, dusting her gloves, Agatha felt the familiar stirrings of anticipation. Something was hidden here, subtle and almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable to her trained eye. The garden's charm was a perfect mask, but beneath the roses and along the winding paths, traces of tension and unease whispered their presence. Agatha continued forward, quietly noting each detail, each minor irregularity, and every unusual glance exchanged among the villagers. The stage was being set, and she, as always, was ready to witness it all.
Agatha rounded a corner of the garden, following a path partially hidden by tall hedges and climbing roses. The sunlight fell in golden patches, illuminating petals that glimmered like tiny jewels. Yet something in the air made her pause. A subtle stillness had settled over this part of the garden, an absence of sound so unusual that even the birds seemed quieter. She advanced cautiously, her curiosity piqued, noting how the soil beneath her feet seemed slightly disturbed, as if someone had recently hurried through. Then, just beyond a trellis heavy with roses, she saw it, a figure, perfectly still, draped among the shadows. Her breath caught, not with panic, but with that calm, observant attention she always brought to such moments. The body was elegantly dressed, the silk of the gown shimmering faintly in the sunlight. A pair of delicate gloves still clung to slender hands, fingers relaxed unnaturally. A pearl necklace rested against pale skin, slightly askew, as if hurriedly adjusted or perhaps tugged in some minor struggle. Agatha's eyes, sharp as ever, noted the small details: the subtle smudge of dirt on a shoe, the faint crease in the collar, the hair slightly mussed but carefully styled. Everything about the scene whispered of normality disrupted by an abrupt, inexplicable finality. Nearby, a group of villagers had begun to notice something amiss. Miss Clybourne's eyes widened as she spotted the figure, her hand flying to her mouth in silent shock. Mr. Havisham froze mid-step, a cup of tea trembling in his grasp, and Mrs. Pettigrew let out a sharp gasp that seemed far too theatrical to be entirely sincere. Agatha, however, remained composed, letting her observations take precedence over startled reactions. The garden, once cheerful and sunlit, now felt charged. Every whispered conversation and polite laugh seemed faint and distant compared to the presence of the lifeless guest before her. She stepped closer, careful to maintain distance and respect, and examined the scene with the meticulous care of a seasoned observer. The rose trellis provided both concealment and dramatic effect, partially hiding the body, yet leaving enough exposed for crucial clues. Agatha's mind catalogued everything: the position of the hands, the tilt of the head, the faint indentation on the ground where someone had knelt. Even the arrangement of fallen petals seemed significant, as if the garden itself had conspired to leave traces of the incident. The corpse's appearance suggested no immediate struggle, yet the placement behind the trellis raised questions. Was it intentional, a deliberate hiding of the body, or simply the place where the person had fallen? Agatha's curiosity sharpened, her imagination spinning plausible scenarios while remaining grounded in careful observation. She noted the reactions of the nearby villagers, their glances darting not only toward the body but to one another, small gestures betraying concern, guilt, or perhaps knowledge they dare not speak aloud. Even in this moment of tension, Agatha's mind remained active, cataloging possibilities, considering motives, and mentally linking each detail to the threads she had already begun to weave throughout the garden. The cerulean corsage, the disturbed soil, the whispered warnings, all began to feel connected now, forming a pattern she was only beginning to perceive. The villagers' subtle cues, their hushed discussions and nervous glances all became part of the mosaic she intended to untangle. As she straightened and took a slow, deliberate step back, Agatha allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The garden's beauty remained intact, petals glistening in the sun, hedges neatly trimmed, laughter faint in the distance. But beneath the surface, a far more serious story had emerged. A life had ended, secrets had been exposed, and a mystery had taken root in the heart of the summer party. Agatha knew, as she always did, that every detail mattered, and that her calm attention might be the key to understanding what truly occurred.
Chapter 4. Clues and Confusion. Agatha returned to the more crowded sections of the garden, teacup forgotten on a nearby table, her attention fully focused on the villagers. She moved with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to observing without being observed, notebook of mental notes forming in her mind. Each guest's behavior, no matter how seemingly trivial, could hold significance, and Agatha intended to catalogue it all. Her first stop was Mr. Havisham, who seemed overly eager to discuss the recent auction. "Quite the competition today," he said, though his voice carried a strain of tension that belied his casual words. Agatha noted the way his eyes flicked toward the ruddy gentleman, the slight tightness in his jaw. "Indeed,"
she replied, allowing her tone to appear light while mentally connecting the man to the small disturbances she had noticed earlier. Every gesture, every turn of phrase was a potential clue. Mrs. Pettigrew came next, bustling toward her with an air of exaggerated concern. She clutched her handbag as though it contained the world's most precious documents. "I simply cannot believe what a dreadful affair!" she exclaimed, her gaze darting about the garden. Agatha noted the inconsistencies in her story, the slight hesitation when asked where she had been during the auction. Her mind ticked off each anomaly, cataloging it alongside prior observations. Even in her exasperation, Mrs. Pettigrew provided subtle insights into alliances and rivalries among the guests. Miss Clybourne hovered nearby, fussing with the hem of her dress, her delicate hands wringing a lace handkerchief. I thought I saw something," she murmured, and Agatha caught the way her eyes flitted nervously toward the trellis where the corpse had been found. The girl's nervousness might seem harmless to most, yet Agatha sensed a deeper undercurrent. The slightest misstep, a glance too fleeting, a hesitation in speech, these were the telltale signs of knowledge someone wished to conceal. Even the younger villagers contributed to her growing mental map. Clara Jennings lingered near the fountain, whispering to a companion, her gaze frequently darting toward the clusters of older guests. Her carefully controlled gestures and slight shifts in posture suggested awareness of events she did not openly discuss. Agatha's amusement was quiet but present. Village life always held its share of comical eccentricities, and observing the nervous choreography of the young and old alike provided a gentle levity amidst the tension. As she moved through the garden, Agatha noticed small contradictions emerging in the stories offered by guests. Mr. Havisham claimed he had been entirely preoccupied with the auction, yet another villager's account placed him near the rose trellis at a critical moment. Mrs. Pettigrew insisted she had been attending only to refreshments, yet a slight smudge of soil on her shoe suggested otherwise. Even the most innocuous details, the direction of a glance, a misplaced glove, or a locket dangling from a wrist, added complexity to the growing web of observations. Agatha's mind worked like clockwork, noting patterns, anomalies, and subtle links between individuals. She jotted imaginary marks in the mental notebook she carried everywhere, each one a potential thread leading toward the truth. Her observations were precise, detailed, and occasionally wry. A man fussing with a monocle while failing to notice his own muddled cuff struck her as both humorous and revealing. A woman fluttering too many gestures at once might be masking anxiety or guilt. By the time she paused beneath a tall magnolia, the garden's vibrant scenery contrasted sharply with the tension she had catalogued. Laughter, polite chatter, and the occasional clinking of teacups provided a cheerful backdrop, but Agatha's mind had mapped the subtle cracks in civility. Each villager was now a character in the narrative she was constructing, their motives and opportunities quietly interwoven. As she prepared to move forward, she felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. Something hidden had revealed itself through behavior and contradiction, and Agatha knew that with patience, the full picture would begin to emerge.
Agatha settled on a quiet bench, her eyes scanning the clusters of villagers as she began to organize her thoughts. The garden, still sunlit and seemingly serene, now felt like a stage set for a far more complex drama than the cheerful afternoon had suggested. Each guest carried with them not only the facade of civility, but a web of motivations, rivalries, and concealed histories that Agatha intended to untangle. Her observations began with Mr. Havisham. The man's earlier insistence on his innocence and casual account of the auction did not align with the glimpses of hurried movement she had noted near the rose trellis. There was a tension in his posture that suggested concern beyond mere propriety. Perhaps he had witnessed something he ought not have, or worse, participated in it.
Agatha considered who might benefit from the corpse's discovery, mentally cross-referencing Havisham's behavior with past village incidents and current alliances. Mrs. Pettigrew was another puzzle. Her dramatic concern had a layer of self-interest beneath it, Agatha noted, and her interactions with certain guests carried subtle signals of loyalty and rivalry. The woman's meticulous attention to her appearance, gloves and handbag seemed almost a shield, a way to maintain control while hinting at knowledge she wasn't revealing. Agatha catalogued this carefully. Sometimes the smallest gestures concealed the most telling motives. Other villagers were equally revealing in their contradictions. Miss Claiborne, for example, claimed to have been tending to her embroidery near the fountain, yet a faint smudge on her hem and a hurried glance toward the trellis suggested she had been closer to the scene than she admitted. Similarly, the young women clustered near the refreshments seemed unusually attentive to the interactions of older guests, their whispers and sideways glances implying alliances that were not yet clear. Agatha's mind began forming tentative theories, noting how social hierarchies and personal rivalries might intersect with the shocking discovery. Even the mundane became potentially meaningful in her eyes. Sir Reginald Crumpet's incessant adjustment of his monocle, Mrs. Bloxby's overly careful placement of napkins, and the ruddy gentleman's lingering attention to minor details all suggested characters whose routines could mask either guilt, fear, or hidden knowledge. The garden itself had become a theatre of subtle signals, each movement a line of dialogue in a story she was piecing together from fragments. Agatha's curiosity was piqued further when she recalled the cerulean corsage, its unusual placement and colour, connecting several observations she had made earlier. The corsage might seem trivial, yet its repeated appearance in her mental map hinted at links between characters that were not immediately obvious. A thought crossed her mind. Perhaps this was not simply a chance misplacement, but a deliberate message, a signal known only to those attuned to its meaning. She allowed herself a quiet smile as she noted the intricate web forming in her mind. Villagers who appeared polite and composed were revealing more than they intended, and small contradictions between their accounts created a puzzle she could not resist. Someone had acted in haste, someone had observed carefully, and someone, possibly more than one, had secrets they hoped would remain undiscovered. By mid-afternoon, Agatha had constructed a tentative map of motives, behaviors, and alliances, each more tangled than the last. The corpse behind the rose trellis was no longer a solitary incident. It was a catalyst, connecting old rivalries, recent disagreements, and subtle signs of envy, fear, and ambition. Every whispered word, every fleeting glance, and every unexplained gesture seemed to point to a deeper story that demanded careful attention. As Agatha rose from the bench, her mind alive with connections and conjectures, she felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. The garden remained cheerful, the sun warm, the scent of roses pervasive, yet beneath it all, a more intricate narrative had begun to unfold. Secrets had been revealed, motives tangled, and the path to understanding only just beginning. Agatha would follow it wherever it led, for in this quiet village, no detail was ever truly insignificant.
Chapter 5. Secrets Behind Smiles. Agatha poured steaming tea into delicate porcelain cups, the soft clink of china punctuating the quiet murmurs of the garden. She had chosen a secluded corner beneath a pair of blossoming magnolias, where sunlight filtered lazily through the leaves, casting gentle patterns across the table. The aroma of Earl Grey mingled with the faint scent of roses, creating a setting both comforting and conducive to conversation. One by one, the villagers arrived, guided by her calm hospitality, unaware that the seemingly casual tea session was, in Agatha's mind, a subtle form of inquiry. She offered pastries and sandwiches with an easy smile, careful to maintain the warmth of the occasion while keeping her curiosity keen. Mr. Havisham took a seat with polite gratitude, his fingers brushing nervously against his cup. Agatha noted the slight tremor in his hands, the way his gaze flicked repeatedly toward Mrs. Pettigrew and the ruddy gentleman who lingered just beyond the garden's edge. She asked questions in passing, gentle inquiries about the auction, the flowers, and recent village events. Each reply was catalogued, every pause, every shift in posture noted for its potential significance. Mrs. Pettigrew's voice carried a careful edge as she spoke of the morning's arrangements. It was all perfectly organized, she said, yet her eyes betrayed unease when she glanced at the trellis where the corpse had been discovered. Agatha observed the tension in the tightening of her gloved fingers, the slight tilt of her head that suggested an effort to control emotion. Here was information in motion, subtle but telling, a hint at discomfort, perhaps knowledge that she could not yet voice openly. Miss Clybourne arrived next, her movements hesitant, hands clasped delicately over a lace handkerchief. I only wanted to help with the flowers, she said softly, glancing toward the cluster of villagers by the fountain. Agatha's mind catalogued her demeanor, noting the nervous glances and tentative words, small gestures, the brushing of hair from a face, the faint inhale before a response, the way her weight shifted from one foot to the other, hinted at anxiety far greater than mere politeness could explain. Each nuance was a potential key to understanding the larger mystery. Even the younger villagers offered pieces of insight, albeit unconsciously. Clara Jennings, perched near the edge of the table, laughed lightly at a minor joke, yet her eyes continually flicked toward the older guests, her posture betraying a careful awareness of scrutiny. Agatha observed how she adjusted her napkin with an almost ritualistic precision, a sign of nervous habit or perhaps a protective shield against attention. Each subtle movement, every polite deflection, added depth to the portrait Agatha was quietly painting. As tea progressed, murmured confessions and half-revealed truths began to surface. One guest spoke of an argument overheard the day before. Another mentioned a fleeting disagreement regarding the garden arrangements. Agatha listened carefully, connecting these minor disclosures to prior observations. She refrained from pushing too hard, allowing villagers to reveal what they wished, while she filled in the gaps with her keen eye and sharp memory. The garden's charm provided a gentle counterpoint to the tension simmering beneath conversation. Bees buzzed lazily among the flowers, a light breeze stirred the leaves, and the distant sound of laughter from the main party offered a comforting rhythm. Yet even amid this calm, Agatha's mind was alive with connections, the subtle anxieties, the gestures of secrecy, the quiet signals of loyalty and rivalry. Each cup of tea, each shared pastry, became an opportunity to glimpse truths that might otherwise have remained hidden. By the time the final cup was drained, Agatha had gathered more than mere observations. She had assembled fragments of confession, subtle admissions of worry, and hints of relationships now cast in shadow. The villagers left with smiles and polite farewells, unaware of how much they had revealed. Agatha remained serene and contemplative, absorbing the interplay of words and gestures. The puzzle was growing clearer, piece by piece, yet the picture remained incomplete. And as always, she would follow each thread until the full story was revealed.
Agatha stepped lightly out into the courtyard, the sun warming the stone beneath her feet and carrying with it the faint aroma of summer blooms. The air was still, carrying the muted chatter of distant guests, yet here, in this quieter space, she could move without drawing attention. Her eyes scanned the ground, noting the slight scuff of a shoe, a leaf that had fallen out of place, and the gentle imprint of someone having passed in haste. Every detail mattered. Even the seemingly ordinary courtyard had its story to tell. Her attention caught a small piece of paper tucked partially beneath the edge of a decorative urn. Kneeling, she retrieved it carefully, smoothing the crisp sheet between her fingers. The handwriting was hurried, jagged in places, with ink smudged slightly at the corners, as though written in haste or under duress. A few words leapt out immediately: names, times, cryptic references to the rose, and a single mention of a cerulean token. Agatha's mind worked quickly, connecting this note to the discarded corsage, the whispered warnings at the auction, and the subtle behaviors she had observed during tea. This was more than a simple scrap. It was a breadcrumb in the unfolding mystery. As she examined the note further, Agatha noted the precision of what was omitted. Entire phrases seemed deliberately vague, leaving gaps that begged interpretation. Who had written it? Who had meant for it to be found? The possibilities multiplied quickly, each one adding urgency, yet also highlighting the careful subtlety of the author. Agatha's curiosity was piqued. The note suggested a motive, a link, or perhaps a warning, but did not reveal the full picture. It was exactly the sort of clue that demanded patience, careful observation, and quiet reflection, qualities Agatha possessed in abundance. From the edge of her vision, she noticed the shadow of a passerby, Miss Clybourne, perhaps, or one of the younger villagers, glancing in her direction before moving on with a pretense of casual curiosity. The timing, the fleeting presence, seemed almost deliberate, as if someone was aware that Agatha might notice more than she appeared to. She pocketed the note carefully, her mind cataloging both its contents and the context in which it had been found. Every passerby, every glance, every slight movement might hold significance, she reminded herself, and she would not overlook a single detail. Her gaze then swept the courtyard itself, noting the subtle disturbances in the paving stones, a cluster of petals that seemed oddly arranged, and the gentle imprint of someone having passed in haste. Every minor irregularity added depth to the story she was piecing together. Agatha allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. Here was evidence, tangible and immediate, bridging the social observations of the garden and the physical reality of the crime. Even in the stillness of the courtyard, Agatha's mind raced through possible scenarios. Who had written the note? Was it intended as a warning, an accusation, or a confession? How did it connect to the mysterious corpse and the subtle alliances she had begun to map among the villagers? The cryptic references, the hurried script, the timing of its discovery, all of it suggested a layered story she was only beginning to uncover. By the time she rose to her feet, the courtyard felt charged with possibility. The cheerful sounds of the main party drifted faintly, yet beneath the sunlight and laughter, a web of secrets had begun to solidify. Agatha's eyes lingered on the note once more, her mind tracing paths, motives, and connections, ready to follow wherever they might lead. The garden had offered whispers and hints. The courtyard had delivered proof, subtle yet compelling, that the village's outward calm masked far deeper intrigue. With the note safely tucked away, Agatha prepared to rejoin the guests, her curiosity sharpened, her investigative instincts fully engaged, and her mind alive with possibilities.
Chapter 6. Nightfall Revelations. The garden had changed entirely with the fall of evening. Sunlight faded into a soft, golden glow, and the shadows stretched longer across the pathways, twisting familiar hedges and flower beds into shapes both mysterious and suggestive. Agatha moved quietly along the winding stone paths, her senses alert to the faintest shifts in the still air. The hum of daytime chatter had disappeared, replaced by distant rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of a late singing bird. The garden, once bright and cheerful, now held a tension all its own, an expectation that something unseen might emerge from the deepening shadows. Agatha's eyes caught a subtle disturbance near the rose trellis. A cluster of petals lay unusually scattered, disturbed as if brushed aside by hurried movement. Her gloved fingers itched to investigate, but she proceeded slowly, careful not to alert any wandering villagers who might still be lingering unseen. Every step was deliberate, every sound considered. The soft crunch of gravel beneath her shoes was a reminder of her solitude and the weight of the observations she carried with her. The evening air brought with it scents she had not noticed during the brightness of day: damp earth, faint traces of crushed grass,
and the lingering sweetness of roses slightly dulled by dew. Each aroma seemed to carry hints of movement, of visitors who had passed through unnoticed. Agatha paused beside a carefully trimmed lavender bush, noting a faint indentation in the soil near the base. Someone had knelt here recently, perhaps leaving or retrieving something hidden. Agatha crouched slightly to examine it, careful to preserve the evidence, her mind racing through the possibilities. Who had moved through here at this hour? What had been left behind and why? The evening had stripped the garden of its daytime masks, revealing layers of intention and secrecy previously unnoticed. A gentle breeze stirred the petals, brushing against her sleeves, and she felt a quiet thrill of discovery. Even in the soft dimness, the garden offered traces, subtle, almost imperceptible, of human action. Each clue whispered possibilities: a hurried visitor, a concealed object, or a misstep revealing guilt or caution. Agatha catalogued it all silently, imagining the scenarios that could connect these fragments to the corpse, the note, and the behaviors she had observed throughout the day. Her eyes fell on the rose trellis again, and she noticed a faint indentation in the soil near the base. Someone had knelt here recently, perhaps leaving or retrieving something hidden. Agatha crouched slightly to examine it, careful to preserve the evidence, her mind racing through the possibilities. Who had moved through here at this hour? What had been left behind and why? The evening had stripped the garden of its daytime masks, revealing layers of intention and secrecy previously unnoticed. A gentle breeze stirred the petals, brushing against her sleeves, and she felt a quiet thrill of discovery. Even in the soft dimness, the garden offered traces, subtle, almost imperceptible, of human action. Each clue whispered possibilities: a hurried visitor, a concealed object, or a misstep revealing guilt or caution. Agatha catalogued it all silently, imagining the scenarios that could connect these fragments to the corpse, the note, and the behaviors she had observed throughout the day. As she rose to her feet, Agatha allowed herself a deep, measured breath, absorbing both the garden's quiet beauty and its undercurrent of tension. The shadows held secrets waiting to be uncovered, and she felt the familiar certainty that she was on the verge of discovering something significant. The evening had transformed the familiar landscape into a stage for intrigue, and Agatha, with her keen eye and calm determination, was poised to follow the trail wherever it might lead.
Agatha returned to the side table beneath the magnolia where she had earlier enjoyed tea, her eyes scanning the scattered papers that had been left by the departing guests. Among the innocuous notes and napkins, one particular envelope caught her attention. It was plain, slightly creased, and sealed with a wax stamp that bore the faint impression of a rose. Curious, she lifted it carefully and slit the edge with a fingernail, revealing the folded letter within. The script was elegant but hurried, the words a mix of careful phrasing and candid emotion. The letter immediately hinted at discord. Names were mentioned with pointed specificity, references to recent arguments, perceived slights, and secret dealings. Agatha's sharp eyes noted the subtle undertones of resentment between villagers who outwardly maintained polite composure. One paragraph described a disagreement at the auction, another alluded to confidential arrangements regarding the garden party, and final line hinted at jealousy tied to the cerulean corsage she had already noticed. Each phrase connected threads she had been observing all day, transforming disparate observations into an emerging pattern. She read it twice, absorbing every nuance, her mind cataloging implications. The letter suggested tensions not merely trivial or social, but personal, possibly deep-seated grievances that had gone unnoticed in casual conversation. Agatha's sharp eyes noted the subtle undertones of resentment between villagers who outwardly maintained polite composure. One paragraph described a disagreement at the auction, another alluded to confidential arrangements regarding the garden party, and a final line hinted at jealousy tied to the cerulean corsage she had already noticed.
Each phrase connected threads she had been observing all day, transforming disparate observations into an emerging pattern. She read it twice, absorbing every nuance, her mind cataloging implications. The letter suggested tensions not merely trivial or social, but personal, possibly deep-seated grievances that had gone unnoticed in casual conversation. Agatha's lips curved in a slight, knowing smile. Small clues she had catalogued, the disturbed petals, the nervous gestures, the fleeting glances at tea, now aligned with explicit evidence. The garden's cheerful veneer, so carefully maintained, had masked a web of rivalries, alliances, and grievances ripe for misinterpretation or worse. From the edge of her vision, she noticed the flicker of movement. Mr. Havisham lingered near the hedge, pretending to inspect a rosebush, yet his gaze was fixed subtly on the table. Mrs. Pettigrew hovered nearby, adjusting a glove, her expression a careful mask of indifference. Agatha, ever observant, noted how the village's reactions betrayed a mix of curiosity, apprehension, and perhaps even guilt. Even without confrontation, she could see which names in the letter might provoke discomfort, which phrases hinted at secrets someone hoped would remain hidden. Agatha allowed herself a quiet moment to piece together the potential connections. The auction's aggressive bidding, the hurried note in the courtyard, and the corpse behind the trellis were no longer isolated incidents. The letter suggested personal stakes, old grudges, whispered promises, and small but significant rivalries. Each villager now occupied a position in an intricate lattice of motives, and the letter provided a rare glimpse into the private emotions that had shaped the day's events. Even the tone of the writing provided insight. Certain words were emphasized, phrases repeated, and moments of hesitation betrayed uncertainty or fear. Agatha's experience allowed her to read between the lines, recognizing where guilt might be lurking and where anger or jealousy had gone unspoken until now. The letter transformed the day's observations into actionable information, a bridge between her patient deduction and the unfolding mystery. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket, weighing her next move. The garden, now dusky with evening shadows, seemed quieter, almost waiting for the next development. Agatha knew that subtle revelations often prompted reactions she could observe without direct questioning. Villagers might discuss in hushed tones what they thought hidden, inadvertently revealing even more. Her calm patience, paired with sharp observation, allowed her to anticipate these moments, ready to capture every nuance. As she stood, Agatha surveyed the courtyard once more. The interplay of shadows and light, of hidden clues and visible behaviors, reinforced the sense that the village's outward calm was only a surface layer. Beneath it, tensions simmered, motives tangled, and secrets waited to be unearthed. The letter had illuminated paths she had only begun to suspect, and with careful attention she would follow each thread, connecting them to the corpse, the cerulean corsage, and the behaviors that had puzzled her throughout the day. The game, as ever, was just beginning.
Chapter 7. The Confrontation. Agatha gathered the main suspects beneath the pergola, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow across the garden. Her expression was calm, almost inviting, yet every movement radiated precision. She had spent the day observing, connecting threads, and collecting subtle evidence, and now it was time to gently bring contradictions to light. The villagers, unsuspecting yet tense, arranged themselves hesitantly around her, clutching teacups, handkerchiefs, or small purses, as though these objects might shield them from scrutiny. She began with a soft inquiry, addressing Mr. Havisham first. "You mentioned that your attention was entirely on the auction," she said, her tone lightly conversational, "yet several villagers recall seeing you near the rose trellis just before the commotion." His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of unease betraying his practiced composure. Agatha allowed a pause, letting the observation settle like a pebble dropped into still water. The man's fingers tightened around his cup, and she noted it with mild amusement, the gesture speaking volumes where words failed. Mrs. Pettigrew shifted uneasily, glancing toward her friend as if seeking silent reassurance. "And yet, Mrs. Pettigrew," Agatha continued, "you insisted on being entirely occupied with the refreshments, though traces of soil suggest otherwise."
her lips pressed into a thin line, her gloved fingers twitching, revealing a subtle dance between defensiveness and surprise. Agatha smiled slightly, quietly noting how the tiniest slip could expose a larger truth. Even in tension, the garden retained its cozy charm. The distant hum of evening insects and the faint aroma of roses softened the edges of accusation. She moved gracefully between observations, carefully layering contradictions with gentle humor. Miss Claiborne, for instance, had earlier claimed to remain by the fountain, yet her startled glance toward the trellis betrayed knowledge she had yet to confess. "It seems our quiet Miss Claiborne may have ventured further than she realized," Agatha remarked lightly, eliciting a faint blush and a nervous laugh. The audience of villagers shifted, eyes darting, sensing that each revelation was like a key turning quietly in a lock. Even the younger guests, usually deferential, could not fully hide their reactions. Clara Jennings fidgeted with her napkin, an innocent action now cast in suspicious light, while Sir Reginald Crumpet fussed with his monocle, as though it might shield him from the scrutiny of reason itself. Agatha's observations were precise, noting micro-expressions and subtle hesitations, cataloging each as part of the narrative she quietly controlled. She made no accusations yet, instead presenting the discrepancies as mild curiosities, allowing tension to rise without confrontation. The interplay of shadows lengthening in the garden heightened the sense of drama. Light and dark played across faces, casting fleeting expressions into sharp relief. Agatha's tone remained gentle, conversational, but every word carried the weight of subtle revelation. Each hint at prior behavior, each contradiction, nudged the villagers closer to the awareness that secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, had their own way of surfacing. By the time she paused, the group's energy had shifted palpably. Nervous laughter, strained smiles, and furtive glances created a rhythm of anticipation. Agatha stepped back slightly, observing the collection of reactions like a conductor listening to an orchestra's subtle cues. She allowed a moment of quiet, letting the villagers digest the implications of her remarks. Suspense lingered, the air charged with the promise of revelation, yet the final truth remained just beyond immediate grasp. Agatha's calm authority, paired with the gentle eccentricities of the villagers, created a unique blend of suspense and cozy humor. The contradictions were now clear, the tensions visible, and the groundwork laid for the next stage of discovery. In this quiet, yet charged moment, she had not named a culprit, yet she had revealed enough to ensure that each suspect and every observer understood the stakes. The game was nearing its climax, and Agatha, serene and attentive, held the threads tightly in hand. Agatha allowed a quiet moment of pause as the villagers shuffled uneasily under the pergola, their polite smiles betraying hints of discomfort. She sipped her tea, letting the gentle clink of porcelain provide a rhythmic calm while her keen eyes scanned each face. The tension was subtle but tangible, like a thread stretched taut, and Agatha knew that careful prompting could unravel the small deceptions each guest had been holding. She began with gentle encouragement, choosing her words with the precision of someone coaxing confessions from a reluctant witness. "Sometimes minor misunderstandings can create larger complications," she said softly, letting the observation linger. Mr. Haversham's fingers twitched nervously, and he cleared his throat. "Well, perhaps I wasn't entirely forthcoming about my movements during the auction," he admitted cautiously, his gaze dropping to the gravel beneath his shoes. "I did venture near the trellis for a moment, but I assure you it was purely coincidental." Agatha noted the careful phrasing, the attempt to minimize significance, and filed it quietly in her mental map. Miss Pettigrew followed, her gloved hands ringing slightly. "I suppose I may have overstated my attention to the refreshments," she confessed, offering a frail smile. "I was curious about a few arrangements, and, well, I may have wandered further than I should have."
Her admission was minor, yet illuminating, revealing her tendency to monitor both people and settings, a habit that now took on a new dimension in Agatha's analysis. Miss Claiborne, her cheeks tinged with pink, leaned forward slightly. I did see something near the rose trellis," she whispered, eyes darting toward the other guests. "I didn't interfere, of course, but it made me nervous. I thought it was best to keep quiet." Agatha's mind clicked with the significance of this confession. The girl had witnessed movement or interaction that others might have missed entirely, providing a link between several previously unconnected observations. Even the younger villagers offered small admissions, each more revealing than they initially seemed. Clara Jennings admitted she had whispered warnings to a friend, attempting to gauge reactions without raising suspicion. Sir Reginald Crumpet, his monocle slightly askew, acknowledged a misplaced remark he had made about another guest's behavior earlier in the day, a comment meant innocuously, but now appearing loaded with possible implications. Each confession, minor in isolation, created layers of tension and subtle intrigue, weaving a complex web that Agatha could interpret with ease. As the revelations accumulated, Agatha silently mapped the chronology of actions, gestures, and statements. The movement near the rose trellis, the cerulean corsage, the cryptic note in the courtyard, and the hints from the letter all began to align in her mind. She noted the interplay of opportunity, motive, and timing, carefully weighing each confession against the evidence she had collected. The puzzle pieces were slowly falling into place, yet she deliberately withheld final judgments, savoring the delicate balance between disclosure and suspense. Gentle humor surfaced naturally in her observations. The villagers, though tense, revealed quirks and eccentricities that lightened the atmosphere without diminishing the seriousness of the situation. A hand flinch here, a nervous laugh there, even the comical fussing over gloves and napkins, all of it painted a vivid picture of human nature under pressure. Agatha's calm demeanor encouraged openness while maintaining the cozy, immersive rhythm of the garden setting. By the time the final small confession emerged, the atmosphere had shifted from polite tension to a shared acknowledgement of vulnerability and minor deception. Agatha stood, her posture relaxed, yet her mind was fully engaged. The motives, the timing, the subtle interactions, all were now clear enough to suggest a narrowing of the suspect pool. Some questions remained unanswered, and the final truth had yet to emerge. But the groundwork was laid. Every whispered admission, every minor revelation had brought her closer to the resolution, and the anticipation of the final chapter hung deliciously in the evening air.
Chapter 8. Resolution in the Roses. Agatha stood at the center of the garden, the late afternoon sun casting soft golden light across the rose beds, and motioned for the assembled villagers to gather. There was a quiet expectation in the air, the kind that comes when everyone senses that a story is about to reach its end. She allowed a pause, letting the murmurs die down, the subtle creak of chairs and the rustle of skirts providing a gentle background to the charged silence. Today, the garden had witnessed intrigue, whispered secrets, and now, finally, clarity would arrive. She began by recounting the chain of observations, speaking with her usual calm authority. This afternoon, several details appeared insignificant at first glance: a cerulean corsage on the gravel, a hurried note in the courtyard, and subtle movements among guests during tea. Alone, each might seem trivial, but when considered together, they form a pattern. She cast a steady, thoughtful gaze over the group, noting the slight shifts in posture, the tightening of gloved fingers, the nervous clearing of throats. Her methodical tone encouraged attention without accusation, drawing curiosity from everyone present. Agatha moved gently through the evidence, aligning it with each villager's prior confessions and gestures.
Mr. Haversham, your trips to the rose trellis, though claimed as coincidental, corresponded with the timing of the corsage's displacement. Mrs. Pettigrew, your interest in the arrangements extended beyond polite curiosity, as evidenced by traces of soil on your gloves and the subtle movements we observed near the trellis. She allowed her words to linger, observing the flickers of recognition, surprise, and unease across the crowd. Each carefully noted detail strengthened her narrative, logically connecting motives, opportunities, and small deceptions. Then, with a gentle shift in emphasis, Agatha focused on the cryptic note found earlier. The note discovered in the courtyard, hurriedly written and intended to mislead, references alliances, timing, and a particular cerulean token. Its content, coupled with our observations today, points to someone who wished to manipulate appearances while hiding resentment from prior disputes. She paused, letting the villagers' murmured reactions settle into silence. The careful tension was palpable, yet cozy, framed by the lingering fragrance of roses and the familiar garden pathways. Finally, Agatha's eyes rested on a single figure, the culmination of her deductions. Taken together, the movements near the trellis, the subtle reactions during tea, the timing of confessions, and the small contradictions between words and gestures, the evidence clearly identifies you, Mrs. Blocksby, as the person who acted in haste, motivated by jealousy and the desire to protect a long-held secret. She allowed the statement to hang in the air, giving the revelation the weight it deserved. Mrs. Blocksby's expressions shifted through surprise, then resignation, her gloved hands clasping together as she exhaled softly. I didn't intend for anyone to find out, but it escalated faster than I imagined." Agatha nodded calmly, acknowledging both the human frailty and the logic that had led to this moment. Other villagers exchanged glances, relief, curiosity, and mild amusement flickering across faces as the truth settled among them. The resolution brought clarity and closure, yet the gentle humor of human foibles remained. Sir Reginald adjusted his monocle with exaggerated precision. Clara Jennings stifled a smile at the polite absurdity of the situation, and even Mr. Haversham allowed a small chuckle to escape. Agatha's deductive reasoning had revealed the culprit, but it had also illuminated the subtle interconnections, alliances, and rivalries that defined the day. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the garden, Agatha felt a familiar satisfaction. The puzzle had been solved with careful observation, attention to detail, and patient understanding of human nature. The villagers, now more relaxed, returned to the pathways, the rose beds, and the garden's gentle charm, each quietly processing revelations, while the garden itself retained its comforting allure. Agatha, serene and observant as ever, allowed herself a small smile, knowing the threads of mystery had been carefully untangled and the village's secrets gently but fully revealed. As the evening settled over the village, Agatha strolled slowly along the garden paths, her senses attuned to the softened sounds of laughter, quiet chatter, and the occasional clink of teacups. The rose beds, now gently shadowed by the lowering sun, retained their floral perfume, mingling with the faint scent of fresh soil and crushed petals from earlier disturbances. The garden had returned to a calm, familiar rhythm, yet the day's events lingered in her mind, each observation and revelation neatly catalogued, like a story told in whispers and glances. Villagers, too, seemed to embrace the return to routine. Mrs. Pettigrew fussed delicately with remaining floral arrangements, humming softly as though to reassure herself that all was as it should be. Mr. Haversham moved with cautious decorum, offering polite smiles while carefully sidestepping the rose trellis that had been central to earlier intrigue. Even Miss Claiborne, still tinged with embarrassment from her unintentional role in the discovery of hidden movements, allowed a faint, relieved smile,
Agatha observed these small adjustments with a quiet satisfaction, noting how each individual sought to re-establish the comforting veneer of village life. As she wandered toward the center of the garden, her gaze fell on the cerulean corsage, now gently tucked into a vase by the refreshment table. Its vibrant hue, once a subtle clue amidst the gravel, now symbolized the delicate balance between curiosity and decorum that had characterized the day. Agatha mused silently on the peculiar nature of human interactions, how small gestures, fleeting expressions, and minor rivalries could intertwine to produce both mischief and revelation. She found amusement in the village's idiosyncrasies, appreciating the quiet humor threaded through moments of tension and conflict. The gathered villagers began to exchange polite chatter once more, yet under the surface, hints of newly formed alliances and minor resentments lingered. Agatha noticed these subtle undercurrents, smiling inwardly. The human tapestry was never simple, and while today's mystery had been resolved, the nuances of behavior and character ensured that life in the village would remain layered and engaging. Even the minor confessions offered by various guests contributed to a richer understanding of motives, connections, and peculiarities, leaving her both satisfied and intrigued. Agatha paused near the fountain, allowing herself a brief reflection. The corpse, the notes, the letters, and the web of whispered secrets had all found their resolution, yet she recognized that the village would continue to harbor mysteries, both large and small. Each interaction she had observed offered lessons about patience, perception, and the gentle art of deduction. The garden, with its winding paths and fragrant blooms, remained a sanctuary of both beauty and intrigue, a perfect backdrop for the quiet adventures she seemed to attract. Her thoughts turned to the subtle humor of the day. Sir Reginald Crumpet fussed again with his monocle, this time in mock exaggeration, eliciting chuckles from nearby guests. Clara Jennings whispered amused commentary to a friend, while Mrs. Bloxby, now reconciled to the day's exposure, allowed herself a small rueful grin. Agatha noticed these gestures with satisfaction, appreciating how human nature could soften even the most tense revelations with charm, whimsy, or self-deprecating amusement. By the time dusk fully settled, the garden exuded a sense of gentle closure. Pathways were clear, rose petals had returned to their beds, and the warm glow of lanterns flickered softly, casting elongated shadows that seemed more decorative than ominous. Agatha lingered briefly at the edge of the pergola, reflecting on the day's events, the careful accumulation of observations, and the subtle satisfaction of seeing the puzzle pieces align. The village was at peace once more, its residents quietly returning to their routines, yet hints of future intrigue lingered, like the faint, lingering scent of roses. With a final serene breath of evening air, Agatha allowed herself a small, contented smile. The mystery had been resolved, relationships gently clarified, and the garden restored to its gentle rhythm. Yet, as she walked back toward the house, she knew that the village's quiet charm and her own curious mind would ensure that other puzzles and peculiarities awaited, delightful challenges for the future. For now, however, the roses swayed softly in the breeze, the village hummed quietly with satisfaction, and Agatha, ever observant, relished the comfort of resolution.